I am so excited about today's presentation and the amount of attendees we have. Take it away, Marty.
All right. Well, thank you, Danica. As Danica said, my name is Marty Mulcrone, and I'm working from my home in the Detroit area. I echo her sentiments. Thank you all for taking the time to join. So we'll kind of just get right into it. So we do just kind of give a little overview of what we're going to be covering today. So I do have a PowerPoint here that we're going to talk about a little bit, but really with this topic, there's no better way for you guys to understand how to do importing and exporting and to actually get in and demo it. So we'll kind of talk about some stuff briefly, and then it's basically going to be, you guys are going to be along for the ride watching me do some importing and some exporting as well. And we'll also kind of talk conceptually about, what other things that you guys could do downstream when you're down the road when you're a little more comfortable. So that said, just kind of set expectations here. I've given a lot of training on this in my career, and typically I would say unless somebody has a real data background, nobody feels comfortable taking the ball and running with this after an hour. So there's no, I don't think it's a realistic expectation that everyone will be a master importer and exporter. But what we're trying to do is kind of pique your interest and understand what you could use imports and exports for. And what I'll do is just use some real basic importing and exporting examples that can just kind of get the juices flowing for you guys and get the light bulbs going off. And that said, so if you guys then feel that you'd like to move forward and this could help you in a certain aspect of any, your processes, either, one-off projects that you have or, tasks or ongoing things that you do, certainly we'd encourage you to reach out to your X3 consultant and they can, get you going on that. We have a lot of people at RKL that are well-versed in this. So with that said, we'll kind of get right into it here. All right, so let's kind of talk about what an import is and all that, right? So an import is really just an alternative way for you to enter data into X3 that bypasses the normal user interface. And you enter data directly into the X3 tables rather than manually keying data into a function. So in other words, everything that we're going to be doing here, you guys could do another way. It's just, so why would you choose to do it via import? So, and we'll kind of touch on this, as we go along, and again, this is where maybe some of your questions will come down the road. But the examples that we have, again, I don't want to try and overwhelm anybody, so they're very simple examples that we're going to be covering. But so a couple of garden variety instances where people do use this, or where consultants have used it, almost certainly, is when you're starting up with X3 and you have to bring all of your customer records over from a legacy system. In all likelihood, you guys used a lot of different common data from your old system, maybe did a little bit of housekeeping to make sure those are still active customers, products, suppliers, what have you, and did a little bit of cleaning up, making sure that maybe you changed some codes or payment terms that you hadn't looked at in a while, those types of things. So in all likelihood, that's a great application for these, and that's kind of a big, honking, massive way to use imports. Again, we're not going to touch on that today. Other things that you guys could use this for is, let's just say that you guys hadn't reviewed your payment terms in forever. And you guys just want to do a real simple export where you export all of your customers, look at what their payment terms are, maybe their credit limits, kind of review that data. You could do that in a spreadsheet. You can update the data from a net 30 to a net 15, credit limit from 10,000 up to 15,000, and then import that data back in for 100 records at a time. And it would update all of them, or thousands really. It is limitless. All right, so that's kind of a little preview of what you could be using this for. So we'll kind of work through the deck here a little bit more. So basically, the imports take the place of using a specific function, and they allow you to create records or modify selected fields in existing records just much more quickly than doing so manually. And really, that's only true if you have many records you're doing. If you're just talking about changing one field or one record, that's probably not a practical application where you're going to see a lot of increased efficiencies from an import. So a couple of vocab words to get out of the way here. So the first thing that we're going to be talking about when you're dealing with the function, any function that exists in X3, or virtually any, there's going to be an import or export template, and that's used to define the fields that are on that template that correspond with the fields on a function screen. So a lot of these exist out of the box, and virtually always, I I see clients have some need to tweak them a little bit, either get rid of some fields that are on there that are just kind of, static, or to add fields that aren't on the out of the box one. And the reason why you would get rid of some fields is just to make it a little bit more of a user-friendly process. So again, this might all sound kind of abstract, but that's why we're going to get into some real demos here so you guys can sink your teeth into the real world application. All right, so X3 will allow you on your template to have several different formats. So for those of you that are so inclined, it does allow for XML and CSV and a few other ones. For sake of this presentation, so we're just going to use CSV, and part of the reason for that is, I'm expecting that we have a wide variety of users on this phone call, and some people don't have any idea what XML is, and CSV is a little easier to get your wrap your head around. All right. And we don't have that many slides, so for those of you that don't like decks, there's only 6 total, including our intro. All right, so many of the import templates that exist out of the box for a variety of functions, and the format for the templates usually should be modified to fit the needs of the user, kind of what I said a minute ago. And again, it's kind of setting your expectations here. You should be comfortable with the concept of importing and exporting data, but I don't expect to be proficient. So we'll kind of just touch on, again, this might be a little bit abstract, so we're going to kind of get into just your simple steps here. But for today's presentation, I used a couple different a couple of different functions that we're going to be importing into. So one of them is your postal code table. So for those of you that aren't familiar with this, in X3, there is a list of postal codes that exist that X3 actually populates, right, for every country and all that. So what I don't want us to do during this call is get really fixated on the particulars of a postal code. This is really just illustrative of how imports work, right? But so pardon me if this maybe isn't a real world example of when you need to do stuff, but this is just a very simple import to use to kind of get everybody started here. So with that said, I'll kind of just read through our steps here, and then we'll cut over to X3, and we'll start using X3 to actually export append and import the data so that we have an updated record in real time. So the first thing you're going to want to do is find the appropriate out-of-the-box template to use as your starting point. So as I mentioned, X3 has hundreds of these. If on the off chance it doesn't have one that suits your needs, meaning there isn't one for the function that you need, it's very likely that you could create it, but I'm just word of warning, that's fairly advanced stuff, but stuff that your consultant might be able to help you out with. So what we recommend, as is often the case when you're dealing with X3 items, when there's a code out of the box and you want to manipulate it. So some of these are just my best practices that I'm kind of relaying to you, not necessarily things you have to do. So this is definitely one example of that. So you'd want to take your file. In this case, it's the POSCOD, which stands for postal codes. That's going to be our template that we look at. We're going to save it with a Y at the beginning of it, and then maybe a number if necessary. And the reason a number might be necessary is there might be multiple times when you're doing this for different needs. So again, postal codes maybe not the best example, but let's say you're doing customer records. You might have a Y customer record or whatever the code is for that you save down once. And then a month later, you might decide, oh shoot, we should have really given a more fine-tooth comb to the payment terms or what have you. So you don't have to do the entirety of a record. You can simply do what I probably incorrectly call a 2-column import, and it's incorrect because it often needs 3 or 4 columns, where you would just have, the basic information that you would need is the primary key, which in this case would be a customer record, and then the field that you care to update right now, which, the example I'm giving is the payment terms. So that would leave every other field alone on that record and only tweak the ones that you, the ones that you import. If you do have, like, let's say a net 30 days on a customer and you re-import it as a net 30, there's no harm done in that at all. So if you have a file where you make some changes, you can only do the changes to re-import or just re-import the whole thing, changes and same record. All kind of equal, come out in the wash from that. All right, so let's kind of talk about next steps here. So after you save it with the Y, you're going to export a range of records that you need. Open them with Notepad, and then we're going to copy them into Excel. And we're going to skip the label headers step for now. We're going to save that for the end here. Then we're going to update the records in Excel, including adding anything where it's necessary. And then it's very important you save it as a CSV file for the way that I'm showing you. So the way that I'm showing you is not the only way that you can do this. And I wouldn't even, it's not even necessarily the best way, but it's just one of those that's easiest for people to follow. So just kind of bear with me. So if you're working with a colleague that doesn't do some of these things or a consultant, they're not necessarily wrong. Yeah, there's just more than one way for this to accomplish these imports. So after we do that and make all the changes we want, we're going to simply import it back in using the template. All right, so without further ado, we're going to kind of get into the meat here. So what I would recommend, so we're going to start with postal codes. And I mentioned that we need to go to the template function, but what I do recommend you do before you do that, or if you do have two screens, I do recommend that you put the function that you're trying to change on one screen and the template on another screen as you're building it. So for now, we're just going to be looking, we're not going to do two screens with this presentation, just the one. So I'm going to just put a little filter on here for some kind of whittle our data down so we don't have the whole universe to look at here. All right, so I'm looking at the postal codes that currently exist in here. And let's just say, again, maybe not a good real world example, but all the zip codes that start with 6050, right, we're missing a 60508, 09, and 09 rather, sorry. And that could be just they don't exist as zip codes or whatever. So again, suspend your disbelief on the real world application here. But let's just say the post office said, we're now making a new zip code 60508, and that is also Aurora, Illinois. So we want to add that, and we're going to do that via import. So again, to state the obvious, you could just add a record here and call it 60508 and be done, but that's not what we're trying to accomplish in this call. So what we're going to do next is we're going to look at the template that we're going to use and just kind of talk about that for a second. So I'm going to go to our function here. And for those of you that don't know, this has your breadcrumbs to get to the path. I'm just using some favorites for sake of speed here. So it's under setup, usage, import, export template, or import exports, then import export template. Okay. So what you normally want to do is start by searching for a description that usually you're not going to know the codes. Search for a description is kind of what you're trying to get at. And again, just, you know, those of you that worked with X3 know that on occasion the descriptions they use are might trip you up a little bit. So just be aware you might need to use a couple different words. So for example, if you look for zip codes in here, you wouldn't find it, right? So just kind of, you know, be a little bit flexible on that in terms of what you're looking for. But I'm using my last reds here just again as a shortcut. So the one that exists out of the box was a POS COD, okay? So I'll kind of just walk you guys through this real quick, and I'm going to show you what what some of the areas that you need to focus on. The first thing you'd want to do is save it as a Y, but let me just show you some of the things that you're going to need to change. Okay. Actually, I'll go ahead and just look at the Y one. So I saved it as a Y, and then really there's a couple things that you generally need to change. Well, again, for the way that I'm showing you how to do this. So let me kind of toggle back and forth. So this is the out-of-the-box version, and it has a couple things that are, I'm going to just change a little bit, and it might not make a difference, but I just know it works this way. So I'm going to make, there's three things that matter here. Your file, or four things actually. There's a file type, and again, I always recommend just go with ASCII, but again, if you wanted XML, this is where you would select it. Your field separator, which for the way that I'm showing you, we're going to want it to be a comma. Your record separator, which this is just ASCII speak for a carriage return, right? So \013 \010. You don't have to memorize that because you can just look at other versions of imports to find that. And then your file format, again, I would recommend just leave that as ASCII as well. So I'm gonna switch to the one that I did. And so I have made those changes. So we have ASCII, comma, left out carriage return there, and file format of ASCII. This won't apply in this template at all. However, date format is usually on here. So if it's anything that involves dates, there's no wrong answer here, but just heads up, you can change the format, right? To be day, day, month, month, year, year. And there's a couple other ones in there too. So it really doesn't matter what you put. You just need to be aware of what the format is, right? All formats will work. You just need to make sure you follow suit with that. So a little word of warning here for those of you that are going to use Excel for this, which I do recommend you do, is so within Excel, if you are trying to do dates, it doesn't play very well with this kind of format because if you have a date in Excel of 0924/20, if you for those of you that ever played around with it, if you change that to like a normal number, it's not anything that's convertible to a date. It's actually like the number of days since January 1st of 1900 or something like that. That's just the Excel version of it. So you might have some 47,000 something or other number. That is how Excel expresses the date. So that's how that's actually expressed. So dates are just a little bit tricky. You know, moderately advanced stuff there. You just kind of need to parse those dates out and, you know, reconcatenate them. And, you know, if that makes your head spin, don't worry. That's why RKL's here. But it's not going to be, you know, you can't put the date in Excel and just, you know, hope for it to work well, because it won't. All right, so next thing we're going to worry about is down here when we get to our actual fields, okay? And I'm going to kind of toggle, and this is kind of where the rubber meets the road on this. And this is a simple version that doesn't have one of the, an indicator. So don't worry about what that is right now. When we do our second example, that will come into play. So what this is basically, these are all the fields that we care about. And this is the table that we're hitting. Because if you'll recall, I said, really what we're doing is just hitting the tables directly, you know, through this import process rather than going through the user interface, which is hitting a table or tables. So what I did for this was I deleted one table off of here, right? So, or I'm sorry, one field, I misspoke. And that is distributor office. And the reason that exists is probably some European type of thing, and that matters to some European countries, but not here. So again, I got rid of it. And again, leaving it there would be a problem, but you just have to leave that blank and you'll see what that means. Okay, so I kind of, you know, I chose to whittle this down to make it a little bit easier, and YPOSCOD is what we are going to go with. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and just export these records, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot a couple things to mention here. I apologize. Okay, so on here, one thing that also exists, and let me expand this a little bit. You have a field in here called range. So if you add a field or subtract it or whatever, or delete it, or you can just change this for existing fields. What a range is it gives you the ability when you're doing an export to select a range of that field. So for example, we could do one country at a time, and you can use them in conjunction. So we could do US only, and we can do anything from, you know, 60500 to 60509, which is what we're going to do. One other thing I forgot to mention for those of you that, that don't know, there's a specific reason why we chose to throw a Y in the front of here. And that is, and this again has applications far beyond the import and export templates, but that is periodically when a patch comes out or a new version or what have you, X3 or Sage rather will make some changes to the templates within X3 or the other areas where you need to protect them. So what the X, Y, or Z protects that, and whenever there's a patch that comes through, the patches are always written in such a way that they leave anything that starts with an X, Y, or Z alone. So if you got this just perfect and took you days and weeks and months of your life to get it just so, and you don't ever want it messed with again, that's why you have to choose the X, Y, or Z. Okay? All right, so we're gonna go ahead and export. So the X3 is fairly smart in that it knows that if you were just in the template function messing with the template, and you go to export it a minute later, it's very likely that you're going to want to export that template that you were just messing with. So usually the code shows up here. However, if it doesn't, or if you're coming in, you know, cold on this, you can, you know, just do your normal function here where you hit the magnifying glass and find whatever you want. All right, so a couple things on here. There is a chrono management button. And if anyone ever gets a report that comes out blank, the first thing I always ask them, or an export that comes out blank, I always ask them to check, see if that box was checked. What this box means, and it's not a very good explanation or a good description in the word, not a good name to tell you what it does, but what it does do is if it is selected, it only exports things that have changed since the last time you exported it, okay? So there's not really a lot of applications where I see that being the preference. It happens very rarely, but I would say, you know, lion's share of the time, you want to leave this box unchecked. All right, so we're just gonna go ahead and hit client. And here are those things that did show up as a yes in the range. This one's set up to have a default as the US. So I'm not gonna export every postal code in the US for now. I'm just gonna do 60500 through 60509. And we're gonna hit OK. And as if you guys recall, the only records that existed were 605.01 through 07, right? So going ahead and doing a wider range than the data that's available does not cause an issue, right? So we're going to export our records here. And this popped up on my second screen, and it asked me what type of file I would like to select. I recommend you use Notepad, or for those of you that have Notepad++, that's even better. So we're going to go ahead and select Notepad. And this popped up here. I'll drag it onto the screen. And this is what your export looks like. So it's basically just exporting all this data in the order of the fields that we had defined on the template in the range that we defined on the export, okay? So if you wanted to, you can make all of your changes on this text file and import it back in. But for sake of this training, I'm going to do this in Excel because I find that's, again, it's probably more practical for you guys to know if you're doing this in math, right? So let me just get that going here. All right, so let me drag that over here. So I simply just copied all the data from the text file, and I'm going to paste it into Excel. And what you see Excel does is it drops all into column A. But what we want is it parsed out, okay? So the first thing that you need to do is go to your data. We're gonna go to text to columns for those of you that are familiar with this. We're gonna do delimited, and we're just gonna say anytime there's a comma, we want it in its own cell, okay? So now this data is all parsed out for us. I'm just gonna kind of double click this to kind of size a little bit here. So let's just say the point of our exercise today, like I mentioned, is we want to just add a 605.08. Okay, and so now what we need to do is this is X3 doesn't really speak to Excel very well, but we can use Excel to speak X3's language. And to do that, we're going to save this as a specific type of file. So let me get this over here. Give me 1 second here. All right, I'm just trying to find a file or a file location here on my desktop here, so pardon me. Okay, so I have a location on here. I just called, on my desktop, I called it import demo. So again, what I would highly recommend everybody does is whenever you're saving a file down, I would recommend you use the import code that you saved it as, right? So in this case, it was YPOSCOD. And we're just gonna call this, you know, demo 2. All right, so that just needs a file name. And I'm going to save this, and this is the important part, as a CSV file. So as you can see, there's, you know, scads of options here of how you pick, of what you can select, and as you can see, even several CSV files. So I don't know if the other ones don't work, but I always select this one, and I don't have problems with it. So if you just pick the CSV rather than like this Macintosh or DOS or whatever. So if we pick that, we're gonna go ahead and save this. We now have a file. So now Excel kind of chimes in and it kind of freaks out a little bit and just says, hey, just be aware you're getting rid of some of your functionality here that exists. So you're gonna get a lot of these pop-ups here. Usually the answer is just hit yes. So we have this file where we need it. We've saved it down and this is ready to go and it's in a CSV format that X-Ray needs. And we're about to go and import the data. So I'm going to go to your imports. And again, I know I'm kind of glossing over this, but your paths, if you need your, on the document itself, it has the paths laid out of how you get to these various areas. So again, we've only been dealing with the YPOSCOD lately. We're gonna hit the client. And this is a little bit weird for a data upload, so just heads up, this kind of goofs everybody up. So you're gonna hit okay, and then it asks you to select your file. I'm going to select the file that we had mentioned. And I should get a pop-up here for Excel in a minute. And of course, since everyone's watching, it's taking its sweet time. All right, so once you have an Excel icon there and your file, you're all set and ready to go. So at this point, I'm just gonna simply hit okay, and we're about 5 seconds away from having an import. All right, so X3 gives you a log, and I mentioned this a few minutes ago. If I wanted to, I could have deleted those first, all the lines that weren't updated, right, up through zip code 60507, but I didn't. I just imported them back in. So X3 just kind of treats that as an update. So it's just saying, yes, I heard you on that. I updated this. Now, we didn't update the information, but this isn't that precise in telling you exactly what you did here, right? And then it just tells you that we did create a new one, okay? So that means that we were successful. So just to kind of prove that out, we're going to go back to our postal code. So I'm going to close out of all this stuff. So we're going to go back to our postal codes and all right, and there we go. So we have successfully imported one zip code, all right? So that's about as basic as this gets. So we're gonna kind of go a level deeper down the rabbit hole here. So everyone just kind of hang on to your hats here. So hopefully everyone's with me so far on these. And let me just kind of back out of here. And now we're gonna talk about, so again, I need another example to kind of walk everybody through. And I chose to just do a journal entry because that's probably something that people use fairly frequently on here. And again, we have a very simple version of a journal entry. But let me just kind of show you what we're going to be talking about here exactly. All right, so that version. All right, so I have a journal entry on here that I did for the end of the month in September, and did all the for those, again, this isn't the journal entry class training, but so all the information that needs to be on here is on here, right? And we'll kind of go a little bit further then with the lines, and really the difference that you're going to see in this entry in a moment, this import rather, is that this uses a header and lines convention, which is, for those of you who have any kind of database background, that's old hat to you. For those of you that don't, I'll just kind of talk about that for just a minute because it might help you from just kind of staring off into space for the next 20 minutes here. But basically, if there's a journal entry that exists in X3, there is one table that has the header information, and the header information is, generally speaking, all the stuff at the top, right? What site are we talking about? Journal type, date, so on and so forth. It houses the number. But that table doesn't know anything about the lines. And in this instance, the lines are the lines of the journal entry. So what we're doing here, just so we can kind of give a real world application here, is we had some prepaid insurance, it looks like, and we're just moving that out of our prepaid and expensing it to, for $1,500 for the month of September, right? We must have paid $18,000 at the beginning of the year, whatever it was, and we're just kind of hitting our monthly expense from the prepaid. Okay, so that's what's happening. So that's the kind of thing that you might need to do every month or what have you. So again, there's other ways to do this, but the importing way to do is what we'll talk about. And again, you'll get a lot, the kind of bigger you think on these things, the more efficiency you gain. So for example, some very common ones that people like to import are their payroll, right? Because that hits a lot of different, accounts and all that. You have a lot of key names and all that. I've seen people use it quite a bit to deal with like your corporate credit cards, right? And kind of enter that expense in there. Either via journal or if you want to do it there, you also, probably not surprising if you've been listening to what I've been saying, you also can do this for invoices as well. So you could do that very granularly down to, each department or what have you. So these particular line items, right? So those are now a different table entirely within X3, right? Now there's a tie between the header and the lines for sure, but they are separate tables that house that information. So in other words, the header does not know anything about these two accounts, right? Nor does it know about the amounts, right? But the lines table does. And then within X3, there's also dimensions. So we're actually going to go 2 levels deep on this. We're kind of throwing you guys into the medium deep end right away. And that is that over here to the right, we have a cost center, which is a dimension. And within X3, just the way they have the table structured, that's a third table entirely. And it's kind of hierarchical if you'll think about it, right? So there's the header that sits at the top of a journal entry, and then there's a line. And then that line has an analytical line underneath it, right? So in this instance, that one line is $1,500 to account number 14300. And then the dimension is all of that amount going to cost center of admin. Now, what you could do, for those of you that don't know, you can split that up into multiple different lines, right? Where you can use like a distribution, or probably in non-X3 speak, everyone probably knows that as an allocation, where you're just kind of splitting out that 1,500 between 2 departments, let's say, right? Let's say it's half finance, half admin, or whatever. So in that instance, there can be a table, your analytical table that sits underneath that is has 2 lines to it, okay? So you might have a header, line 1. Line 1 has 2 analytical dimensions. Then you can have your normal line 2, which in this case is your prepaid, or I'm sorry, your expense rather, pardon me. And let's just say, you know, again, maybe not a real world example, but this could only have 1 cost center potentially, right? So that's all possible. And that, you know, that could be how this is all set up. And again, I understand this is kind of abstract, but when we get to an example, hopefully that'll shed some light on this. So basically what we're going to want to do for sake of this example is we're going to want to take this journal entry, and I just want to do the October version of this, okay? And I want to do it via an import. So a couple things I need to note here. We've never really looked at the template before, so we're going to look at that. And a couple things I'm going to want to remember is just this journal entry number, right? So GEN 4051. So we're going to go to the templates here, and yeah, we'll go ahead and cancel that. And again, I kind of pre-baked some of this. So we do have an out-of-the-box accounting entries template that exists, and of course I saved it as my own version. So a couple things, the more complex you get on a journal entry, the more it behooves you to actually make those changes, right? So I mean, for those of you that weren't really wowed about the efficiencies we gained by getting rid of 1 field in postal codes, that's totally valid. But the more we get into complicated ones, it just helps keep things straight a little bit more. So we're going to just kind of, I'll just show you this. This is the out of the box one. And again, you know, some of the stuff that it does is the way that I have it set up. And then I made some changes here. So again, the date format does matter. You need to, or it doesn't matter, but you need to take note of that here because it is a journal entry. So we are going to have an accounting date. So we just need to make sure it's in that format. And I'll just go ahead and show you just real quick, one quick concept here. So these are the tables that I was referencing before, and also just kind of the levels that exist, that hierarchy I was trying to describe. So the GACC entry is the header. The GACC entry is the line, or the D stands for detail, and the A stands for analytical or dimension. Okay, so this is where I kind of, you know, you might get lost here. So I'll try and, if we have questions about this, this is often confusing to people. So basically what we need to do, and as I mentioned when we were doing the postal code, this did not come up on the postal code because that was simply one, okay? But for X3 to understand what you're talking about, it needs to know each line what table it needs to hit. And you do that by putting an indicator at the beginning of each line, okay? And when I say put at the beginning, you'll see in a moment, because we're gonna again do an export, just kind of digest what that's showing, and then make the change we want and do an import again, okay? And then I'm gonna kind of do a half demo at the end of how I recommend you handle more complicated ones, right? Where we actually put in the headers on your template. But so that's kind of what we have left the next, you know, hopefully 15 minutes here, leaving some time for Q&A. So I'm gonna go to our version. And again, as I mentioned I would do, I made some changes here to just the format. I added the full carriage return. And again, it already had the comma separator, but neither here nor there. So then down to the fields. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant to show this. So what I did is the out of the box version has 45 rows that it had. And for what I was trying to do, I didn't need a lot of these. So some of these are fields that we simply don't need. For example, these are dimensions. And as some of you may know, Excel has, or X3 rather, has the capability of having up to 9 dimensions. However, this particular journal entry doesn't utilize all 9 of them. So I'm going to whittle this down so I don't have all these blank cells on there. So what I did is I just deleted all of the versions of the dimensions that I didn't need, right? So again, if you're following this, I deleted the lines simply by clicking on each line, hitting delete, right? Until I only have these first 2 dimensions that I might ever use, right? My company only uses 2 dimensions, let's say. So again, this isn't a journal entry training, but there are a couple things in here that I will show you when we get in Excel that that a journal entry will illustrate that apply elsewhere, right? So that said, I'm just gonna go ahead and export this, and we're just gonna take a look at it, right? So let me go to the exports right away. And again, it knows what the last one I was in was. I'm gonna leave chrono management alone. And I just wanna do one of them now so we don't overwhelm us. All right, so we're gonna do just the one. And I'm opening on my second screen. It asked me how I want to open this file. I'm selecting Notepad, and I'm dragging that over for you all to see. And so this is how it comes out, right? So again, it's kind of like I described. It has a G line, which is a header, and then everything under that G line is the detail that belongs to that header. So for those of you that are wondering, yes, you can do multiple exports. You can do an export of multiple journals as well as an import of multiple journals. And that would just simply have another G record here, followed by at least two D records, right? That may or may not have A records underneath them. And they may or may not because you might not have dimensions on the given lines that are in question. Again, that's just journal entry specific. That's not important specific. But the point is, you don't necessarily have to have the line, every line on there that is indicated with an indicator. So right now, there's a lot of gobbledygook to you, and you don't know what fields these are. We can make some educated guesses, right? And that's what I'm going to address at the end here. But for now, we're just going to talk about how we would go about importing this in the simplistic way. And then we'll kind of talk about like some strategies around just kind of get your head around exactly what you're looking at here, rather than having to memorize that, you know, on the A record, the fourth code is the fourth field is the, value for, dimension 1. Okay, so that's obviously not practical. So we'll kind of just get into this here real quickly. I'm going to just open up another page, and hopefully I copied that. I think I did. Oh, no, I did not. So hang on. I just forgot to copy. All right, so if I paste this data in here, now sometimes Excel is helpful, and in this instance it was. Because I already had Excel open and I already did a paste from that function into Excel, Excel knew that I probably would want to go ahead and parse this out. So in this instance, we're able to skip that data text to columns. All right, so just sometimes Excel tries to help you out and sometimes it's right in so doing. Okay, so for sake of what we're trying to do here, I'm just going to simply import a journal entry, the next journal entry for the next month. So a couple things here just to kind of keep straight. If you're going to be importing a new record, you usually want to get rid of your primary key and just have that be blank. And when you do that, the system will assign it. So in this instance, our primary key is our journal number. So I'm going to get rid of that. And then I just want to change anything else on here that is different between September and October. So the first thing we want is, remember we talked about our date, and it was 4 for the year, 2 for the month, and 2 for the day. So I'm just going to change that to 10/31. And now it's going to hit 10/31. And now really the only problem that I have left here is that in my descriptions, I said this was September when really it's October, okay? So I'm just gonna do an edit replace in Excel. And this is happening on my second screen, the wizard. All right, so it's gonna replace all. It should replace 3 of them for us, and it did. Okay, so this journal's ready to go, all right? So I'm gonna save this. And again, very similar to how we did for the postal codes. Right, follow the convention of YGAS, and then I'm going to call it, journal entry demo. Oh, don't hit caps lock. And we'll just call that 2. And remember, we have to save it as a CSV file. Okay, so a couple words of warning here, right? Number one is because you're using this as a CSV file, that means that you cannot have any commas in here. So if you had these are the dollar amounts here. If you had this formatted the way that accountants like to see it, that will be a problem, right? Because this has a comma, and what that tells X3 is to skip or to put a 1 in here and then move on to the next field, right? That's what a comma separated means. So you do not want that. So you have to kind of make sure these are in plain text. And then a couple of these are just X3 quirks, right? And one of them is, and you'll see in a minute what we have laid out here, but X3 doesn't like you. You'll notice that these are all positive numbers. And for all of those of you that are accountants, you would say, how can we have a journal that has 2 positive numbers, right? And the answer is you don't. These are simply the way that X3 needs to read them is it doesn't like these numbers to be negative, but the field in front of it is called the sign, and that's where you would indicate your credits, right? So again, that's just kind of an X3 speak thing of how X3 needs the data fed, right? So you can't say negative 15,000. You have to have 2 separate fields and handle it. So just be aware of that. And again, that applies to a lot of places other than journal entries, right? Those of you that if you have like discounts, price lists, things like that, Sometimes need negatives in there. Sometimes you have like a type that would indicate it. So, and again, if you're looking at this data and it's all confusing to you, we're going to spend the last 5 minutes trying to show you a way to make it a little bit easier. But that said, so we have this all saved as a CSV. We're ready to go. And now we're going to do one final import here. So we're going to go to our imports. And again, X3 knows where we were last. And I'm going to grab that file. And again, once my icon populates. Oh, so one other word of advice here, especially if you have a really big file. A lot of people might have sort of the instinct that closing their file is a good idea when they're trying to import, and that's actually the opposite. So you want to make sure you save it and don't go messing with it as it's importing. But if you have a big, huge file that you're trying to import, it actually goes faster if it's open rather than X3 going and looking into a closed file. So just heads up on that. All right, so that said, so remember what I did there is I deleted out the journal number, right? So I left that blank. I changed the date to October 31st, and I just changed the description from September to October. So we're gonna go ahead and hit OK. And sure enough, we have our journal, and it happens to be the next one because this is a test environment and nothing's happened. Nothing's what happened last few days here. So I'm gonna go ahead and look at this, and we'll just take a look at it. Just kind of prove it out. So there's your journal number 52, right? It has a date of October 31st. And, we go to our lines and we want to make sure that it has an October description in there as well as in the default. And, it has the cost centers in there. So again, when we're talking about like how you set things up specifically for you, this journal entry might not have some fields in there that you might find you need later. For example, and I don't know offhand if this actually is true because I didn't go through this with a fine-tooth comb, but you might have the reversal field may or may not be on that template, right? So if that is something you want to do or you're setting up your reversal ones, you just need to make sure that's in there, make sure you have the values correct as well as the reversal date. So again, that's kind of why there are different templates, just depending on your needs. And some of them aren't necessarily that they're different, it's just it didn't occur to you the first time that you'd want to reverse it, then maybe you make another one where you do, and then you might never go back and use that first template again. And just knowing that you can, say no when you don't want to use it. So just quick word of warning. So now we're going to kind of get into best practices for just a minute here on how you kind of get your head around some of this stuff. So hang on just a minute here. Let me just pop open a file here. Okay, so what this sheet is, let's kind of delete this out here, and for a second, we'll just take our data as it exists now. So I'm going to export our journal that we just did, or actually, we'll just look at the September one. So I'm going to just copy this, and I'm just going to paste it in Excel. And what I've done here is I copied down the headers that exist for each of these within X3, just so I know what these are. So again, this is a little bit tricky to get your head around because I have 3 sets of headers because there's 3 sets of data. Basically, how you interpret this is anytime that there is a record with a G, right, it kind of corresponds with this G up here, right? So this is how I have set it up. So now that I know, like, okay, so what does insurance premium even mean? Oh, that's the reference, okay? And likewise, when we're going down here to these various ones, like, what's the ledger type? Okay, the ledger type is 1. Now, some of this stuff might not make sense to you, and you might not have any idea what your ledger type is. But that's why using the export is helpful, because if you export one that already existed, you kind of know, you already know what the values should be for some of these fields, right? Because some of them are a little bit, confusing to you, or to anybody, frankly. But what this is showing, just one thing I wanted to point out here, in both the D records and the A records, it has the lines on here, right? So again, because this is hierarchical with 3 layers, right? This D record, the line is line number 1, and then the second one is line number 2, right? Just like we saw in there, there's the account, the top one was the balance sheet and the second one was the expense. But when it sits underneath it, when we have the analytical dimensions, each of those, in this instance, they only have 1 record for each of them. So they both have a line number of 1, okay? So just heads up on that. And the reason I say that is, while I showed you a very simple version here, where you can just take what there already is, tweak it, and upload it, you also might build these from scratch. where you need to set something up where you're feeding these in from somewhere else or hard coding them and what have you. So it's important that you understand these. I guess couple other words of warning, I guess, before I turn it over to Q&A is, so you do have the ability to really goof things up if you're not careful. So just be very, very careful when you're doing this. And a couple ways that you can goof things up is if you do go to, if you are updating records, just make sure that you're conscious of what you're doing in Excel. You aren't like accidentally, dragging down values that shouldn't be there, what have you, right? So all the kind of ways that you could think that things could go sideways from, not really going over this with a fine-tooth comb are totally possible. So what I do recommend is that, obviously be careful, take your time, all that stuff, of course. But if you do have a big batch of, let's say you're doing your customers or products or what have you, and you have 1,000 of them, just do 2 at a time, just do 2 the first time, right? Don't do all 1,000 at once. Do those 2, make sure everything is looking like it should and all that. And then just check your data and make sure, that, everything's good with your links, if you have links and you valued them or whatever. So just for those of you that have some Excel savvy, just be careful for that stuff and don't trip. Just be careful not to trip over yourself on that. Then just one other thing I want to point out here. So, as I mentioned, it wasn't just a guess that these were signs, right? So you do have a field in here, sign, on your D records, and that's what these 2 records are here. Okay, so with that, so that's kind of what I wanted to cover today. And like I said, this is really just kind of pique your curiosity on where you could use importing and that type of stuff. But as far as the presentation goes, that's what I wanted to cover. We can kind of go back to the deck here for a minute, and we'll open up for Q&A.
Hey, Marty, this is Danica. We have a couple questions.
Okay. If I just click on the Q&A, do I see them, or do you want to read them, or how do you want to handle that?
We can do both, but if you click on the Q&A, you can see them. So Cindy asked, you said you could load multiple journals on one import. Can there be a journal with multiple companies as long as the companies balance within themselves?
If you can do it in a normal journal entry that way, then yes. But I think in that particular instance, that's more of a journal entry question. Right? If you have intercompany, you might have intercompanies come into play. But yes, you could if you have it set up so you can do that manually.
Okay.
So I'm getting
the next question. Yeah, I'll read it. Next one from Caitlin is there a way to export customers and then import them as inactive?
So probably, and the reason I say that is, so I think yes, because I think that active and inactive is a box on there, which is a field. So yes, yes, you could. And the way you would do that is you would just import it back in with I believe, who is no. So I think if you so there's one thing I didn't mention, and again, this is kind of X3 speak. And I don't want to open up a huge can of worms on this, but for those of you that don't know, there are some values within X3 where there's actually a table that exists that is numbered. And rather than put in, like yes, no, or something like that, there is a numeric code for the value that you want, which again is why it's important to look at the export. But yes, you can do that by selecting the right number on that, the active code.
And then the follow-on to that was, is there a way to import a new customer contact?
Yes, you can. Yeah, it would be similar to the hierarchy where we had the record started with a G, D, and an A. On customers, it works the same way where there's a contact table that exists. And yes, you can do that via import as well. So, and I mentioned before, there was kind of like the 2-column import thing that I had said that's kind of a misnomer. But you could do one line that's very basic that just has like the header record and the customer number. And then underneath that, you would have whatever your contact indicator is, and then have all the fields in there for that. So your header might be very basic, right? Because you're not doing anything. You just want to say, I want to attach this contact to this customer. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense.
The next question is from Zachary. We have instances where we have a blank space at the start of a lot number field. Does X3 allow blanks at the start when importing, or would that be something that would need cleaned up before?
I think that depends on how you have it configured. Um, I guess I would ask, do you want to have blanks on there? If you didn't, there could be a fairly easy way to update that just with some Excel tricks. But yeah, I mean, I believe, again, that's a question about having the, if that code allows leading blank. Yeah, no, I think you can configure it so yes, it does. But I guess, you know, what your consultant would probably get into you with is, do you want that? Because, you know, the time of import is the perfect time to stop having that. Because that's often what people have, right? They might have had a legacy system that had 10 spaces, and they only want, you know, 4 of them, so there's always 6 blanks. So I'm assuming it's coming from something like that. But yes, you can, but, you know, I guess, do you really want to? So we have your regional account managers here.
Thank you so much, Marty, and everyone have a great day.